Instead of just telling you a story or giving you a movie or a game that is sort of set in its direction, you have to co-create this world. You have to create it in your mind. You have to choose the options that build the game, which means that your version of the in-between, which is the world that Betwixt takes you into, is never going to be the same as somebody else's. And towards the end of the game, you completely create the world that you're in. I'm not going to give any spoilers away, but you become increasingly, actually, I can tell you that you go through levels. You start as a seeker, you're looking for something. You level up to hero, partway through the game, which sounds like the top, but it isn't. Beyond hero, you get to become the author of the story, and beyond author, you get to become the architect of the reality.
Welcome to another episode of Mental Health in the Age of the Metaverse. I'm your host, Christian Ulstrup. My guest today is Hazel Gale. She goes by Zibbs. Zibbs is a cognitive hypnotherapist, former kickboxer and boxer with multiple world, European, and British titles, and the founder of Betwixt, a choose-your-own-adventure app that combines story, sound, and science to help you build mental resilience. She's also the author of The Mind Monster Solution. Zibbs, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Let's dive right in. You've been on quite the journey, from boxer and kickboxer to hypnotherapist to entrepreneur and author. How'd you get here?
My entire personal history is a bit of a rambling path of weirdness. I'm the kind of person who gets distracted by shiny things and then very quickly needs to break those shiny things apart and understand exactly how they work, so that I can put them back together in some way that interests me. But I can say this only because I've looked back on this rambling path and wondered how the hell it all happened. So I started out as an artist. I went to St. Martin's, which is an art school in London, and did a fine art degree. When I left my degree, I had a couple of exhibitions, but mainly I worked in hospitality because that's what you do with an art degree. While I was working in this pub, I met a guy. Because if I'm honest, I fell in love with a guy who was therefore able to get me to do things I wouldn't do otherwise. Bearing in mind that it's a long time ago. This is over 20 years ago. I was not a healthy person in those days. I was a smoker, a drinker, every bad habit under the sun, really. Yet he got me into a kickboxing gym. And within 15 minutes of being there, I knew that I was hooked. It didn't work out with that guy at all, but it didn't matter because I found love with kickboxing instead. I trained a lot and I got pretty obsessed with it. Within a couple of years, I was winning titles. I won. On paper, it looks great. I won all those titles you mentioned earlier on. But in reality, I was a complete mess. So I burnt out horribly by having completely the wrong mental approach. I was totally unaware of my emotional state. I can tell you now, looking back, that I was having mild to moderate panic attacks on a near daily basis. And I didn't know I was having panic attacks. I just thought there was something wrong with my heart, or there was something wrong with my body. I was waking up. I remember I couldn't sleep, of course. And I would try to sleep in the middle of the day and I'd wake up, like as if I'd just had the worst nightmare in the world. And all of this stuff was going on and I was totally unaware of it. So I had to hit a horrible rock bottom, which involved serious depression, and chronic anxiety, and physically my body just pretty much gave up. As somebody who prided herself on physical prowess, not being able to get up a flight of stairs to my flat in London without having to stop at least once to catch my breath was a level of humiliation and a sense of failure that I wasn't prepared for. I was broken by it. So I needed to address this, obviously. And as with most people who find themselves in a state similar to that, it's really hard to accept. At first you need help and then you have to find the right kind of help. I exhausted all of the medical options I could find. I went to various different therapists and counselors. And the one that really worked for me was cognitive hypnotherapy, and a therapist in particular called Trevor Sylvester, who is actually the creator of cognitive hypnotherapy. I think most psychologists and therapists will tell you when people wonder what kind of therapy they need, they say, I'm struggling with this, which type of therapy should I go to? By and large, the style of therapy doesn't matter that much. It's the therapist you connect with that's so important. I'm sure you guys are well aware of this with what what you're doing. That rapport between the two human beings is the thing. That's the active ingredient. And so for me, that was cognitive hypnotherapy and Trevor. And working with Trevor and then learning and then becoming a student of cognitive hypnotherapy and qualifying and then working with my clients completely changed my life. I mean, it got me back in touch with my emotions. I built, a sense of self that I wasn't aware of. This all meant that I left, a realigning of my values meant that I left kickboxing and boxing behind peacefully. I didn't need it anymore. I simply didn't need to be punching people in the face anymore. I would rather help them. And so I walked away from all of that. And instead I started practicing. I was practicing as a therapist for, I'm not actually sure how long it's now, 11 or 12 years, I think, all in all. And I've just stopped seeing clients because of the Betwixt work. And, the rest is sort of history.
Now, cognitive hypnotherapy, how does that work, and how is that different than other approaches?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to explain. It's certainly hard to explain in a concise way. But the best way, I think, to understand it is that it's like a mix of cognitive behavioral therapy. So obviously there's the cognitive side to it. And this sort of very logical, practical way of working, mixed with the more imaginative and, I would say, engaging elements of traditional hypnotherapy and NLP. So, guided visualizations, work with metaphor, and, an emphasis on reframing thoughts and feelings, but in this sort of visual, interesting way. So yes, I think it's a lot of people come to therapy sessions expecting what they see when they look at hypnotherapy on the TV, and they need their expectations managed, because that's not what they're going to get. It's much more, it's much less look into my eyes and much more tell me how your father treated you when you were younger. So yeah, it's a mix between type of talking therapy that you would expect with some of this more creative, engaging stuff from the more what's the word I'm looking for, alternative side of the therapy. Interesting.
And that difference between sort of the stage, magician image that people have, why is that just a coincidence that they both have the same name, or is there any relationship between those two things?
No, there's a relationship, but it's a little bit like if you were to look back through human evolution, everything branches off. Like the branch is quite far away.
Okay.
So, the trance state is the thing that links it all together. The hypnotic trance is not a magical or false fantastical thing that some people talk about, and you have a right not to believe in all that stuff in it. Sure, but it is an everyday state that the mind goes into. We have to go into a sort of different levels of trance just to get through our day. But trance is not a weird thing. It's just how the mind works. And in particular, it's how the mind learns. And it's how the mind goes onto autopilot. So great examples of everyday trance states are getting into your car and driving to work. You don't have to think consciously about every time you touch on the indicator or press a pedal in your car, because it's all automatic. You go into this kind of driving trance and you get to work. And sometimes you get to work when actually you left to go to the shops and you're like, oh, hang on a minute, what am I doing here? Because that's programmed in and you went into your trance state and everything just happened. But other more interesting sort of everyday trance states include things like being wrapped with attention on a really interesting phone call or conversation with somebody, or reading a novel or watching a movie. The real world sort of fades out. Right? People often report having terrible back pain, but if they watch an amazing movie for that hour and a half, it's gone because they've become numb to that pain because they're so involved in the movie. These are all just other sort of versions of trance. So the stage hypnotist uses that trance state. And by the way, they're very selective about who they get up on stage. They get the people up who are going to do what they're told. They use it to get people to cluck like chickens and make everybody laugh. Whereas in therapy, we use that same trance state, but we use it very differently. And there's nothing that happens in therapy, in hypnotherapy, which is about taking control of that other person. This is the thing that most people need to let, that's the fear they have to let go of before they'll engage with the therapy. Really, like, if you do this to me, will you be able to, implant ideas in my mind that wouldn't be there otherwise? And the answer is no. Even if you were on stage and clucking like a chicken in a super deep trance state and the fire alarm went off, you wouldn't just burn. You would hear the fire alarm and you would leave.
And so in the case of the stage act, is that something where, I don't know, people they're sort of bought into it on some level, and so they're doing it themselves, or what's kind of going on there?
Yeah, I think that's a good way of putting it, but that's not to say it's all fake.
Mm.
Certain different people are suggestible to different levels. One of the things I learned about, I'm actually qualified twice as two different, both clinical and cognitive hypnotherapy. And we got involved in, we looked at the Stanford scales of suggestibility, which are meant to, it's just 10 questions, 10 things that you can either pass or fail at. And if you get 10 out of 10, you're super suggestible. And if you get 0 out of 10, you're not. And one of them is, basically been told that your hands are stuck to the table. And if you're suggestible, you will sit there and go, oh my God, I can't move my hands. If you really needed to move your hands, you would, but it feels like you can't. If you're not suggestible, just like me, I'm completely unsuggestible, 0 on the Stanford scale. You sit there and go, oh, rubbish. I could totally move. I was so gutted. But having said all of that, even though I'm totally unsuggestible by those traditional measures, cognitive hypnotherapy still completely changed my life. So you don't need to be in the I will cluck like a chicken category to get anything from it, because it's so much more than just accepting strange suggestions about what your body's doing.
Very interesting. Does suggestibility have anything to do with agreeableness? Like, I'm thinking about the big 5.
No, it doesn't.
No, interesting.
Yeah, really, you would assume that suggestibility and naivety, or what's the word I'm looking for? Credulity. I mean, you assume these things are linked, and actually they're not. What suggestibility and hypnotizability tend to be connected with, hypnotizability and suggestibility are different. Hypnotizability is being able to go into a trance state, that I can do. What these things tend to be connected with are imagination, creativity. People who are extremely hypnotizable are often the type of people who really love to get into reading fiction, or watching movies, or going to the theater. These things are linked. There's a much sexier way of looking at it than just, will you buy anything that anyone tells you, which is a different set of character, of personality traits, I think.
And is there, I'm reaching now a little bit, but I'm curious if there's any of this has been illuminated by neuroscience.
Yes. Yeah, lots has. Actually, instead, I don't have to hand any of the data that would be useful here, but I can recommend that if you come across Huberman Lab, which is a podcast by Andrew Huberman, who is you know it. Yeah. So yeah, me too. Massively. I'm going through the whole thing, like from start to finish at the moment. So for anyone who doesn't know, Huberman is Stanford's ophthalmology, that's eyes, and neuroscience professor. He is a very interesting guy with a very personable feel to the way he teaches, and he does this free open access podcast, which looks at everything from sleep to light exposure to how to build your muscles better, blah, blah, blah. There's one on hypnotherapy in there, which is really interesting. And I learned a few things listening to that one as well. So if anyone's interested in the scientific backing behind hypnotherapy and the use of trance, I would refer you to that podcast.
I think, if I remember correctly, the guest we had on for that one, I think, has like an app. He's commercialized his hypnotherapy. Yeah, he
is a psychiatrist who's been using hypnosis in his treatments for many decades, and he's put it into an app. And the app treats a number of things, insomnia and anxiety. I've taken a brief look at it. I don't know that much about it, actually. It's called, did know what it's called. Reverie with an I. If anyone wants to check it out. But don't, obviously, because Betwixt is better.
Of course. And I think that's a good segue. So you were seeing clients as a cognitive hypnotherapist, and that was really a focus for, you said, almost a decade. Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah, decade. And now I have moved full time to using technology and software to perhaps reach more people, than you could have otherwise. Betwixt, what is it? How does it work? What are you up to?
Betwixt is an immersive choose your own adventure app that combines story, sound, and science to help you build mental resilience. So the way it works is at the moment, it's an NFT gated app. So you need an NFT in order to play. Currently, it's not necessarily always going to be that way, but it is right now. The NFT unlocks an app on your phone.
And just for those parents who don't own crypto, the 20% of Americans, or some percentage that's growing smaller and smaller as crypto gets bigger. NFT stands for
non-fungible token. And actually, you don't, our NFTs are hosted on a platform by Galaxis, and you don't even have to have crypto to buy them now. You can buy them with a credit card. You still need MetaMask, which is a crypto wallet, which is where your NFT lives, but that's easy. My 77-year-old mom set up a MetaMask account on her phone in about 1 minute. If she can do that, I promise you anyone can.
Anybody can. And an NFT is, so it's kind of like the buying like a ticket to something, as opposed to the traditional, you download an app and create an account or something like that. It's a slightly different way of getting access to digital content. Is that fair?
I think thinking of especially our ones as a ticket is perfect. NFTs tend to have utility. Ours is all about the utility of that, but it is also a work of art. So with Betwixt, one of the most exciting things about it is that the NFT has given us this possibility to have an evolving generative piece of artwork that responds to each user's individual choices that they make in the game, in the choose your own adventure story. And it transforms those choices into a visual. It's a beautiful abstract image. But the way that abstract image forms and the colors and the lines in it are all based on your choices. So you end up with this totally unique and increasingly complex and beautiful image that represents your journey into yourself, essentially, that you can take away afterwards, and it will serve as a reminder of this journey you've been on. So there is some therapeutic benefit to that. You could consider it an anchor. It could become a kind of something that helps you to feel calm or strong, or whatever it is that you got out of the game could certainly get linked to that image. But just from an artistic point of view, it's cool. It's cool that this image creates itself and that they're all completely unique, and that your image that you go through, if people wanted to play the game multiple times, for example, they would have multiple images and they can look back and say, this is when I was doing my degree. And this is when I was falling in love with that person. And this is when I was struggling with depression. And these images would all represent those different points of your life, which to me is really magical. I imagine people blowing them up and putting them on their walls. But I digress. So the app is NFT gated currently. Excuse London. Currently, you need an NFT to access it. Once you do, you create a regular old account with your email address, and you don't need the NFT stuff anymore. So anyone who's afraid of it, don't be put off. And you enter into the game. Now, the game begins in this strange frozen world that responds to your thoughts and your feelings. Your mission is to escape this strange frozen world in one way or another. But in order to do that, you have to accept the challenge to see yourself clearly. So with each dream, chapters are called dreams, you go through this process of answering, questions of varying levels of difficulty, really, about who you are and what's important to you and what you love and what you want. All questions that really we should be asking ourselves anyway, but we don't. And you build self-awareness as a result of answering these questions. You also befriend a mysterious guide known only as the voice, which is actually, a voice in your head in the game. And this character leads you through this process of gaining self-insight and clarity by picking apart these questions and also engaging with the metaphorical world around you, which of course all represents whatever you need it to represent. The world changes enormously as you play. And you find yourself in a very different place at the end of it, essentially. I think, something I often forget to say about this for anyone who is NFT savvy is it sounds like, because you buy the NFT and then you create your art on it and you have this finished bit of artwork at the end, it sounds like it would be a one and done thing. Like you buy your NFT, you wouldn't ever sell it on because it's got your art on it and that's it. But actually you can sell it on or gift it to a friend, because the moment it changes wallets, the artwork resets and the next person gets to play their very own journey through the game and create their own artwork. But the best bit about this is that the first person's artwork isn't lost. It gets stored into a history of the NFT. So the more hands the NFT passes through, the more people play the game on that particular NFT, the more images are going to rack up in the back history. And they're a little bit like echoes. People have been there before, or footsteps in the snow of this frozen world. So I find that really, really also quite magical.
I love that. So there's almost like a genealogy to it. It's a lineage.
Yeah.
That's quite special. Well, this is, I think, especially to somebody who's not familiar with crypto or anything else, they're probably like, this sounds like a massive undertaking. It makes sense to me, given your background, how you thread these things together, especially, art school and everything else. But would love to hear from you. How did you become inspired to do this, and how has this project evolved since you started?
It's evolved a lot. We started it 3 years ago. My co-founder and business partner, Ellie, it's actually her brainchild. It was Ellie was working in a tech startup, and she left a really cushy job to research mental health and games. And she was really interested. She was researching mental health first, and she kept asking people. She spoke to a lot of different therapists and a lot of different therapy clients, trying to understand what it was that made therapy effective and how it can be recreated in some other means, because she wanted to create some kind of mental health app. And so she was asking people what apps they used. And most people had an answer. They would wax lyrical about some AI app that helps with depression or anxiety or whatever. And then she would ask them, she wanted to know about usage of these things, because she would ask them, how often do you use this app? And found overwhelmingly, the answer tended to be something like, well, actually I don't, or I did for a while, but I've stopped. And so she was like, well, hang on, this is weird. Everybody's got this answer, but nobody actually seems to be using it. So she would ask, well, what do you use? Now, what do you use on a bad day? What do you do when you're feeling down? And that's when she found that lots of people would answer that they would play games of some kind, not necessarily what we would usually consider video games, but a lot of digital games. And some people also saying they would read fiction, or they would escape into a fantasy world. And so that's when she thought, okay, this is what we need to do, because there are lots of mental health apps out there, and they are extremely well put together. And in developer-led trials, they perform brilliantly. But in the wild, people don't stick with them. So retention rates are terrible, sometimes as low as 1 or 3%, even though the apps are good quality. So she was like, well, okay, how can we take the essence of video games and fantasy story and fiction and use that to package the very helpful information that tends to show up in these kinds of apps? How can we merge those two things to create an app with real utility that's going to help people to build resilience, but at the same time feels exciting and engaging, and that they want to come back to? And that's when she phoned me up. She nervously pitched this idea to me. She didn't really think that I was going to buy it. She didn't know that this was literally a dream job for me, that I've been a gamer all my life. I absolutely love gaming of all kinds. I don't go a day without at least a cryptic crossword with somebody, puzzles and gaming, everything. Plus art, plus psychology. Okay, I'm in. So that was 3 years ago. It started, we did our first version of it was in ManyChat, which would basically means it was a text conversation between us and somebody else on Facebook Messenger at first to trial it out. And it worked even in that very basic form. So we knew then that we needed to essentially give up 3 years of our life to build this thing, which is what we did.
And just to clarify too, the application itself is mostly text-based. Is that right?
The game is text-based, and it works as text-based. So, I am personally really interested in one of the reasons that you and I met in the first place. So I'm really interested in bringing it into VR. I love VR myself. I find it fascinating to be able to step into that world. And I do think it would work well in that world. We also thought about audio versions, which I'm less enamored by, purely because the reason the text is important is because you have a conversation with the voice. And sometimes you just pick from choices, but a lot of the time when you're answering the really important questions, you get to write freely into the app. And what happens a lot with the information you type in is it gets fed back in different ways later. Now, in order for us to do that, it has to be text, because unless we get some extremely clever AI that manages to understand voice, turn it into, and change the pronouns and everything. I mean, I'm sure that would be possible, but it's not something we have access to now. So in order to feed everything back, it has to be text. Now that might sound like a limitation, but it isn't, because what happens when people play the game, because it's text, is their imagination creates their very own version of the in-between, and they are not fed any of that world-building stuff. It all comes from their own mind. And this, although at first we felt would probably be a limitation, the text, we've realized it's a strength. People would message us, telling one guy messaged us, he was over the moon because he said he was convinced, some guy in his 40s, he was convinced that he wasn't capable of visualization, and it had been a block for him with therapy and self-help stuff forever, because he just couldn't see things in his mind. But he said when he played Betwixt, he had a really clear idea of where he was, and it meant that he realized for the first time ever that, of course, he could visualize, and he could visualize very well. So there's something quite magical about it being text. It's like, it reminds me of A Never Ending Story. I don't know if you remember that film. It's from before your time. Unfortunately, it's my time.
Just a couple of years. Yeah.
But that book comes alive. And when you read a book that you love, that's what happens, right? It comes alive for you in your head, in your way, and it's yours. And nobody can ever trespass in that version of the reality, apart from filmmakers who occasionally try to do that. And then and you really watch the film and you're like, this is wrong, because it's not how I saw it at all. But text allows you that. It allows the player that level of creation right from the outset. Like, they are creating the world. They're not being spoon-fed.
That's really interesting, because it's kind of counterintuitive, but it also makes sense in that you could actually give somebody a more engaging experience by giving them more space to fill in the blanks. Whereas I think my intuition would have been, VR or something like that is the way to go, because it's the most immersive. But if it's immersive but not personalized, then maybe it's not quite right.
Yeah. I have been trying to work out how we could make it more personalized at the same time as being in VR, and I have various ideas for that actually, which could be amazing. Yeah. But it would be.
Have you just on that point? Have you dabbled with Dolly or Midjourney or any of these AI?
No. I will at some point. That's a shiny thing that will take my attention for sure when I have the time. Yeah.
Yeah. Be careful. It's very shiny. Yeah. It's a lot of fun. Interesting. And so through this process of there's kind of this back and forth between the application and the user. You're getting material from them that's deeply personal that then gets incorporated into future chapters. What does that mean? Like, can you give me an example of what that means in practice? Like, what happens in the story without giving it all away? Yeah,
I don't want to create any spoilers for you, but I can tell you that there are lots of different ways in which that happens. I mean, so the ways that you can interact with the voice, sometimes you pick from a set option. Sometimes you are just creating a reaction to them. You are deciding how you respond to something that they've said, which is all, whether you say something back or whether you stand silently or whether you give them a smile, for example, might sound like extremely basic filler choice, but they aren't. Because when you play, you really stop and think, I don't know, how would I respond to that question? And how do I feel about this conversation? And how do I want to tackle that enormous wave that's about to swallow me up whole? There are lots of different ways it can happen, and the world can get quite dramatic. When the game harvests your responses, we do that carefully to pick the right kind of response, of course. And it gets fed back later, sometimes in ways that the player won't even realize, because it will be fed back in a sentence and it will just feel like a sentence that works for them because actually it's their stuff and they hadn't realized it. And sometimes it will be very obvious. The voice will say, when we were back in the second dream, you told me that you valued X. And I want to know now whatever the next question might be. What is actually going on there is something very core to cognitive hypnotherapy, actually. So one of the reasons that cognitive hypnotherapy is not attempting to, and wouldn't be able to if it wanted to, just change somebody's mind in a way that the therapist thinks is right. So mind doesn't work like that. We're cleverer than that. We make look like chickens for fun, but we're not buying into that 100%. But we will buy into our own ideas. If you walk into a therapy room and you tell somebody you want to feel calmer, actually normally you say, I want to feel less anxious. Then you start to focus on what that means. What is, if you're less anxious, what are you more of? Well, I would be calmer. I'd be more focused at work. I'd be more present with my partner and my kids. Now, this information is important because if you feed that back when somebody is, for example, thinking about their future and you say to them, so I'd like you to imagine a future version of you who is increasingly present with their kids and increasingly present with their partner. They're able to focus at work. What does this mean to you? Why would you want this world? Now the person is buying into a possibility that perhaps they haven't thought of before because they were so busy focusing on the anxiety that they saw as this monstrous thing that had to be deleted. But we all know what happens if you focus on the thing you don't want. If you're getting ready to get married and all you can think about is tripping over in the aisle, you're making that more likely. If you're cycling down a road and you focus only on the pothole, obviously you're making it more likely you're going to cycle into it. You need to flip the question around and start thinking about what you do want. So when Betwixt is farming and harvesting these bits of information, that's essentially what it's doing. Important bits of information that the user talks about at various different times that can then later on be fed back in this sort of world building into the game itself. So they become a reality of sorts already and that they can be a part of how somebody will see their future. That's all going to sound super abstract, but it's a wonderful thing because it means that you can completely forget that you told the voice something. And bearing in mind, I've obviously tested the game, I don't know how many times, hundreds of times. And I will do it by binging it. I'll have to sit down for 3 days and do all of the chapters. And still, when I get to chapter 10 and 11, things get fed back and I'm like, oh yeah, completely forgotten I said that. And it's delightful and also really helps with self-reflection because you're like, why did I really say that? Did I really believe that at the time? No, is that actually what I want? Or is that actually how I feel? Because it creates this separation between you and the rambling thoughts that come out of your mouth in the game, your virtual mouth in the game, which builds awareness.
Interesting. And what are what's some of the feedback that you've gotten from users in terms of how it's made an impact on their life?
Feedback has absolutely blown us away. We've been testing, obviously any startup needs to be constantly in communication with their users. And of course the game is iterated a lot as a result of that. But what I have, maybe I'm pessimistic, maybe I'm lacking in confidence or something, but at every single one of these moments, especially early on in the process, I was pretty convinced that some people would like it, but the majority of people would be like, what the hell is this? And it's not what happened. The majority, I can't remember, with our first lot of tests, we tested with, and we spoke personally to somewhere between 40 and 60 people about one of our very early versions of the game, just a few chapters. And we put out a question about level of engagement. How engaged did you find yourself? Very extremely engaged, quite engaged, so-so and not engaged. Now, don't quote me on this because I can't remember the exact number, but I think it was something like 78% or perhaps even in the 80s that said either quite engaged or extremely engaged. And most of them were extremely side. And this is what we knew things like the text adventure was going to work. We've also had a lot of people, I say a lot, a number of people with ADHD reporting that it was particularly exciting for them because they can't read fiction. Because if they try, they get to the end of the page and they just haven't taken it in and they have to keep rereading and rereading and they're just like, this is not worth the effort. But because Betwixt feeds the information in a way that, first of all, the soundscape is wonderful. Our musician, Nikolai Sadreas, is a complete wizard. And the soundscape locks you into the world. So that immerses you into it and makes it harder to be distracted anyway. But also the text comes up. You don't read a whole chunk of text. Most people find that a little bit off-putting, a huge chunk of text appearing on your screen. Instead, you get fed sentence or even partial sentence by partial sentence, which come up in this rhythm on the screen. And so you're locked into it because you read it one bit at a time. And as a result, people with ADHD have been saying that they have been able to engage with this sort of fantasy and fictional material in a way that they've never really been able to before.
Interesting. It's almost like makes me think of an observation I heard. I can't remember where I heard this, but somebody describing Twitter as more of an oral tradition, and the way you're describing, where it's like chunks of text, it's almost discursive rather than presenting something where you're not going to be engaged. So that's extremely interesting. It totally makes sense. And so, you're using a few different bits of technology, some of which are extremely cutting edge in the case of NFTs and crypto. But you're also tapping into your expertise, things that have worked. Stories, of course, have been around for a very long time. And cognitive hypnotherapy, which you've been using for a decade, has a good track record as well. What are some of the advantages that you've found in using mobile technology and using crypto, and perhaps what are some things that you get excited about or you're anticipating will be helpful, specifically because of these technologies?
There's loads of potential answers to that question. I mean, so in terms of the mobile technologies and this interactive fiction, we're using Inkle, which is the interactive fiction engine. Very good. In terms of using that stuff, I think that there's the main benefit there is just this opportunity to bring people into this world that they create, which is what makes our app so different to a computerized CBT app or a chatbot app that talks through your problems with you, or just a simple journaling app. Those things have their place, but like I said before, they're not engaging people enough, and they in particular don't engage a certain type of people, which are people who want to play games, who want to get involved in something a little deeper and more creative. So the fact that it's on a mobile is very important. This thing could work on a PC. It's a progressive web app, but we're not making it possible for people to play on a PC because they want the app and the phone to be this portal in their hand that takes them into this fantasy world. That's part of it. And also we are trained, smartphones have very successfully trained us at engaging with smartphones. We are all experts at engaging with smartphones. We all know exactly how to have a text conversation with somebody. It's all very familiar to us. Doesn't matter our age. If we have a smartphone, we get it. So this makes there's no barrier to learning or starting where people have to, a huge barrier to beginning in most video games. You can't go from being a non-gamer to doing World of Warcraft without going on a really steep learning curve. Whereas that's not here in these mobile technologies. In terms of crypto, I mean, I am no crypto expert. We're working in crypto. Ellie is more of a than I am, to be honest. And I'm increasingly excited by it. Well, I've been excited by it for a long time. It's one of the latest shiny things, and it's fascinating. But what for me? So I don't think not everybody, people in crypto, people in Web3 understand this. People who aren't in Web3 and don't know what Web3 is don't get this thing that I'm about to say. And I think this is the most exciting thing about Web3 and crypto, but Web3 in general. And that is that in Web3, as opposed to Web2 or Web1, the user, the participator in a thing doesn't need to be a passive consumer of information fed to them by Meta or Facebook or whatever we're going to call them, or whoever it is that has created the app that they're using. Instead of being this passive consumer, in Web3, the person who is participating is co-owner, co-creator of the product in many cases, and certainly of the community. NFTs mean that you actually have some skin in the game. You have bought an NFT. It's like a small investment. So you become an investor in that company. Same with companies that have their own tokenomics and their own coins. It's the same deal. People buy into it. And on quite an abstract level, that is really beautiful to me because it might sound like it's just a way of making money out of people. I don't see it that way. People would be spending their money anyway. If we spend our money on a Web2 product because we're just subscribing to it, we're giving our money away and then we're consuming the thing. But in Web3, we give our money away, but then we're part of the thing. And that runs very parallel with what Betwixt is as well. And instead of just telling you a story or giving you a movie or a game that is sort of set in its direction, you have to co-create this world. You have to create it in your mind. You have to choose the options that build the game, which means that your version of the in-between, which is the world that Betwixt takes you into, is never going to be the same as somebody else's. Towards the end of the game, you completely create the world that you're in. I'm not going to give any spoilers away, but you become increasingly, actually I can tell you that you go through levels. You start as a seeker, you're looking for something. You level up to hero, partway through the game, which sounds like the top, but it isn't. Beyond hero, you get to become the author of the story, and beyond author, you get to become the architect of the reality. And that's what I think we're doing with this movement from Web 1, Web 2, Web 3. We're allowing people to become the architects of their digital world.
Makes a ton of sense. Correct me if this is kind of a clumsy metaphor, but is it almost like, with Web3 and kind of what's going on with crypto, blockchain stuff, it's almost like if you went to Starbucks and when you bought a cappuccino or whatever, you also had the ability to purchase shares in Starbucks or something.
Yeah. It's kind of like by buying a cappuccino in Starbucks and become a shareholder in Starbucks. Yeah. Yeah. It's exactly like that. And so there is a financial incentive. If you think something's going to be the next big thing, it's worthwhile buying your coffee there. At the beginning, it's a good idea financially, but there's something more wholesome to it that I find interesting. It's not just about the potential to make a load of cash or a load of crypto. It's about your opinions mattering, and it's about your presence mattering beyond just making up the numbers. Your ideas matter. In Web3, people take products and they build on top of them and they iterate them for you. And things can go off in completely, especially with NFTs, things can go off in completely new directions that you'd never anticipated and actually have no control over. You wouldn't want it, because what's happening is your thing is being adapted by the users of that thing into something that is even more valuable to them.
So it has there's something, the word meaning keeps coming to me. It's like there's something more meaningful about it, and it's with it being kind of community driven. It's also actually probably a little scary as a business owner, creator, because it really gets out of your control, right?
Yeah.
Does that resonate at all? I don't know.
Yeah, it is like potentially completely out of your control, and I think that we have to just make peace with that, to have the benefit of people having skin in the game and being really involved and engaged in the build. You do have to also have some boundaries around it, of course. If you went and you set up a Discord community for your product, and then you thought, okay, these guys are the investors, and what they say goes, and then you wanted to just follow every win that they had or every demand that they had, you could get yourself into a pretty dangerous place pretty quickly. Right. So you need to have some boundaries, of course, but you're not sitting behind your desk in your rich suit dictating to these people who don't feel like they're on level with you. They are actually they are in the game. They are the game. They are the community. It's exciting, if a little abstract.
No. I find the space so fascinating. When I was an undergrad, I was very fascinated with like politics, philosophy, and economics. And these were always like kind of abstract concepts. And, it's like, how does this apply? You're just like theorizing. But what's fun about crypto is it's like, no, you actually have to make design decisions around governance. And it's, what you're reminding me of was, a lot of the ancients were very critical of pure democracy. Yeah. And it's like, right. That's like, it can be a little bit of a tough system, but at the same time, maybe it's not kind of a pure centralized, monarchical system or something like that. But with crypto now, there's so much flexibility that you as the creator or kind of the founder of the project and the community can really have to think about these architectural decisions, economics, politics,
Yes. And you have to make decisions without having any idea where the space is going, because nobody knows. Literally tomorrow, everything could be different. It's not for the fact.
How do you, so as a cognitive hypnotherapist and somebody's working in the space, I got to imagine it's pretty stressful with all the ups and downs. How do you personally, stay sort of even keeled in the crypto space?
Yeah, I have loads of things that I make sure that I do to stay even keeled. These are the same answers, not just in the crypto space, but just the same answers to how I handle my mental health in general. But I get outside the house every day. I go for a walk first thing in the morning. If that sounds like such a boring answer, but if I don't do it, I am not okay that day. I'm a little bit less okay than I would be otherwise. So getting out and moving through space is really, really important to me. The other thing is talking to people. I mean, that's again another really boring answer. I'm really close to my family. I don't have that much close family. Actually, my dad died 13 or 14 years ago. And obviously that was awful. That was happening that all happened at the same time as my crash, and I was fighting. So yeah, that was all part of that, terrible mix of things back at that time. But I still have my mum and I have my sister, and I don't go a day without speaking to both of those people. And again, if I were to not speak to them for a period of time, this would leave me ragged. And I think everyone talks about their tools, don't they, for feeling better, and no one tool is going to work for everybody. But I think we have a real duty to ourselves and again, it's about self-awareness, to work out over the years of our lives what works for us, what has to be on our sort of personalized prescription for wellness, and what we not be on it. And that's sometimes the hardest part. I don't really drink much anymore, but I used to drink a lot when I was younger. Moving into, obviously didn't drink when I was fighting. That was easy because I had a reason not to drink. But when I stopped fighting, I started drinking again and slipped right back into a load of my old ways. And I was like, okay, no, this doesn't work. Being in that addictive cycle doesn't work for me. So I made the decision to cut that stuff out. But, it takes a long time. I'm 42 now. It's taken me a long time, as well as a number of different therapy qualifications and spending my life in the world of mental health, to be able to get to a place where I could say, yeah, the perfect day for me, mental health wise, looks like this. I'm not really very good at routines. So I'm totally open to the idea that these routines will change, and that's fine too, because always whatever they change to has the same benefit.
You mentioned tools, sort of understanding what tools are available to you. And this is something we talk a lot about on this podcast is, tools in technology, whether it's something like crypto or simply technology as codified processes, right? In kind of the traditional sense. There are a lot of folks who I think are very critical or skeptical of technology in the context of mental health. This is something that's very much in the zeitgeist. I think there are also a lot of people who are very optimistic about it. If you sort of view it from the right perspective, like you or me. What do you think is going on at the intersection of mental health and particularly digital technology? The sort of the negatives or the risks, as well as, how we maybe should think about it going forward.
It's funny, isn't it? I mean, I was lucky enough to grow up, I grew up before the internet, right? So I come from a pretty analog background. And so I am in that group of people that could look at social media and tech in general and, the rise of gaming over the last few decades and go, oh God, that can't be good. If everybody had my childhood where I ran around and, outdoors and building treehouse stuff, they'd all be healthier. I'm not in that group of people because it's extremely short-sighted. And the people who are growing up now, an online community or gaming is their treehouse, and it's not necessarily a different deal for them. It's as real as it would be otherwise. But we do obviously need boundaries around it. I think that tech and AI in particular have amazing potential when it comes to mental health. I also think we need it to have potential because there are far too many people in the world who are prohibited financially or culturally from visiting therapists. Here in the UK, we have a wonderful NHS system, but the wait lists are massive. If you want to go and see a psychologist or if you want to speak to somebody about your mental health, doctors don't have that conversation, even though you could argue that they should, but then they're not trained to have the conversation, so they can't. Right. So it's not possible for us to say, no, face-to-face communication with a therapist is the only way to make your mental health better. It's just not going to work that way. But AI is not there yet, as I said earlier on. There are engagement problems with it, but it does have this incredible potential to be if not more, at least the thing that gets people to the place where they feel capable of talking about it with a human. And if that is I don't think that is the only thing it can offer, but if that were the only thing it could offer, it would still be completely invaluable. So yeah, I mean, I think the con side of it is that any kind of tech, including gaming, if people are using it, I think I read this in Super Better that there have been lots and lots and lots of studies looking into computer gaming and mental health, because so many people were convinced that it would be bad for your mental health, that it would encourage you to, actually want to buy a real gun, etc., all that sort of stuff. To my knowledge, there is no decent study that has suggested that at all. But there are, for some people for whom gaming isn't healthy. And what those people tend to have in common is that they are using it to escape reality. They are using it to not deal with the real stuff that's going on. That's kind of like an obvious statement, because that would be true of anything. If I used this pen to escape reality and not deal with my problems, then this pen would be bad for me too. So that's not about gaming being bad. And it's not about tech being bad. It's about how people are using it. So if we're going to optimize tech and mental health, we need to look at how people are using it. And coming back to Betwixt, that's really what we want to do. We want to create a game which, instead of using to escape your problems, you can actually use to perhaps go part the way towards or even completely solve some of those problems. A game that will get you better at communicating with other people so that you can feel more sturdy and robust in your social relationships and your intimate relationships on the outside. That's what tech has to do, in my opinion, in order to really fulfill its promise.
Yeah. I mean, I think, I usually save this question for the very end, but I think this is probably a good segue. I always have fun asking this. You mentioned the being rooted in reality, and are you focused on that or escaping? Clearly there's this trend of technological development, continuing, accelerating, potentially, and the line between the real and the virtual is starting to get a little bit blurry. In fact, I don't know about you. I use screen time on my iPhone to really sort of reflect on my own habits. And it's something that we use as kind of a core tool with a lot of the families who we work with. And the truth is, a lot of us are spending a lot of time in the metaverse, just in 2D, not quite 3D. And so that's going to become more personalized, more immersive, financialized, et cetera. And so, you think maybe projecting out 10, 15 years, and that line between reality, virtual reality becomes quite difficult to discern. Is there still a case to be made for reality? Should we take it seriously?
Okay, first up, we're all in virtual reality anyway. None of us is perceiving the actual real world, right? We aren't capable of it. The brain doesn't work like that. So we're all in our own virtual reality versions of the world. We can only perceive the world as our brain has learned to perceive it. And that will be based on not only the limitations of the hardware, which is a fascinating topic. And if you want to look into that, I recommend the book. What's it called? Just reminded me of it. And the User Illusion is another book similar. User Illusion will do actually for my recommendation. It was the one I was thinking of, but it will do. We're not only limited by the hardware in our brains, but we are also limited by our experiences. We can only perceive what we have learned to perceive. So I don't think there is an argument for objective reality on that basis. But if we were to ask, is there an argument for the reality that we each experience outside of tech? Then yes. And I guess everything I just said there, that the intersection needs to be that whatever we're doing in the metaverse or in the apps whatever we're doing online, if our stuff can improve the life that we have when we're no longer online, then that is a good thing. It's serving its function. I don't think we're ever going to be able to achieve. I'm not sure if I believe myself when I say this. I was going to say, I don't think we're ever going to be able to achieve true connection to the level of human to human connection online. But actually, I think we probably can, but it will be different. It will still be a different kind of connection. It's really the voice in the game is just an algorithm. Of course, it's a script. It's not there, but people frequently report that they can't shake the feeling that they're developing a real friendship. And even with AI apps that I was talking about earlier on, and sort of slightly slating in terms of the connection, that one of those apps, I think it's Wobot, has measured the therapeutic alliance, which is there's a scientific measure for therapeutic alliance. It's normally looked at between the therapist and the client, and it tells you, what level of empathy and rapport that those two people have. Wobot have used it for the little robot, animated robot that uses AI to talk to you, and found a significant level of therapeutic alliance with that AI, with that extremely basic AI thing. So maybe we can get to the point where we can have real, meaningful relationships with something that is not of flesh. Maybe we can, but I don't think we're there yet. So I think the real world has to be, the quote unquote real world has to be paramount. But only in terms of, I don't care how much time we spend in each of them. Just as long as the two worlds benefit each other, then we're going to be okay. That's, I think, what I'm getting at. I'm not sure if I've answered your question at all.
No, I mean, I think this is good. I mean, I think this is, as I was saying before I hit record, the answers are always quite different. And we've had maybe one or two guests who had like a pretty strong stance, but it's one of these things where kind of the more I've thought about this myself, it seems like sort of an absurd question, but I also think it's quite salient because that is the direction that we're going. And you do have people, even 20 years ago on like Second Life, right? Who that was sort of the primary focus of their attention. And in many ways it's like, a lot of people who are working, they live in the Slack metaverse or the Outlook metaverse or whatever it is. It's like we sort of already found ourselves there in some capacity. And I do wonder about there's one particular news story. I think it's maybe 3 or 4 weeks old at this point. But did you hear about the Google engineer who either left or was put on administrative leave or something like that because he was ringing the alarm bells about how the AI that they created, he thought it was sentient?
It's not those two AIs that were talking to each other in a language that the humans didn't understand, so shut them down. That was a while ago. No, I don't know what. No. I've not come across that. Don't know how I've missed it.
Yeah, I'll have to send it to you. I mean, it was pretty incredible because I saw. So the name of the AI, it's a product that Google's been working on called Lambda, LAMDA, and this gentleman, I think his role was like AI ethicist or something like that. He had a really colorful background, but he was particularly, I think, tasked with identifying bias in AI, and he was asking all these questions about, like, I think religion in particular. And so he leaked a transcript after, I think his telling was like he tried to essentially escalate that there was some issue with, he thought it was like sentient. He thought it was like conscious. Yeah. That this was like a living or a conscious being in some capacity. And his superiors, I guess, didn't act on it or something. And so he leaked the transcript because he thought that this needed to get out. And I remember seeing initially a bunch of commentary about this on Twitter and figured, it's this kind of like silly news story or something that grabs your attention. But then I actually looked at the transcript that he put out, and it was like, oh no, this has arrived, right? And it's a little bit scary to think about because, on one hand, I think there is this extremely optimistic. Well, first of all, there's a question of whether or not it's alive, or whether or not it's sentient, which that's way above my pay grade. I don't even know where to begin with that, right? But what's kind of more interesting is that if this gentleman was willing to put his, career or livelihood or whatever at risk because he was so persuaded by this technology that it actually did necessitate some kind of action, then, there's the upside of that, which is kind of like you were describing, where this could be something that is useful as a tool that's very kind of human centric and allows people to, accomplish their goals and do some of the things you're doing with Betwixt. But if you think about it being used by a third party to persuade somebody to do something that's not necessarily aligned with their own interests, that's a little scary to think about.
Sure, but that you don't need AI to do that. I mean,
True.
that's going to happen anyway.
Yeah.
That is happening anyway, and that's happening in awful, awful ways already. And that's another thing, in the question of whether or not we need to really police tech usage. And definitely, online games where players talk to each other. And there are some horrifying stories, especially with the young boys being taken in and sort of groomed essentially by older men who want to convert them over to often sort of very anti-feminist or anti-female religion. I'm sure there's plenty of other types of ideas, but the ones I've read about are men sort of coercing young boys to go out and do really awful things to people, and that's often taken place on multiplayer gaming platforms because it can do. So that's you don't, like I said, you don't need AI for that.
Right.
Happen anyway. And I think another thing that came to mind when you were talking then about the question about the reality thing. If you had asked, is the metaverse and is a digital reality ever going to be as much a reality as the real world? I think my answer would definitely be yes. And I think that this is a thing that especially people of my generation and older who have lived before the internet need to understand, and often we don't understand, is that people who have grown up with the internet and who've grown up with online communities, to those people, the game that they're playing, or the thing that they're building online, or like you said, the sort of their Slack metaverse or whatever, is definitely as real, if not sometimes more real, than the conversation around the dinner table they're going to have with their parents later. And that has to be respected. Or we are not going to be able to meet them where they are, which is, of course, exactly what your company is doing so well. We have to respect that already the metaverse, as it is now, and increasingly it will be, is as real to the people who play it as not. That's also why NFTs, I think, are unavoidable and important. And I remember one person asking me when I talked about getting into this, of course, we met lots of resistance with it. Because there is a dark side to NFTs. We're not doing any of the dark side stuff, but it's definitely there.
What is some of that stuff?
Oh, the slightly silly seeming investment side of it, like buying a pixelated image of a cat for enormous amounts of money in the hope that you're going to be able to make a load of money out of it, and buying, selling, and going into this really, really unstable currency as well to do this. All of that is scary and difficult, and lots of people have broken themselves financially as a result of it. That's not great. But if you're selling an NFT for a reasonable price, as we are, and it's there as a utility, it's there as a gateway to a thing, you're not really participating in that side of it. However, it still gets the backlash. But when somebody asked me when we were building it, saying, what the hell is the point of an NFT? Why would you want to buy a JPEG on the internet? And people really were just like, well, I don't get it. Why would you want to do this? Yeah. I found myself saying to somebody, look, if you're a gamer, if you have an account in World of Warcraft, that world that you're building, or any of the other ones like that, I'm actually not into those sorts of games, so I'm not going to give a great example of it. But the world that you're building in there, and the avatar that you're creating, your Fortnite avatar and all that stuff, if you're spending hours and hours a day and you're socializing there, that is, something you need to, currently you can't own. You can sort of, you own the intellectual property of what you've built, but in those games, they're centralized. You don't actually own it. It's not yours. But when you think about that side of it, you can understand exactly why NFTs would work and why they would be desirable to people. Because if we are growing up in a world where the metaverse and the online world is as important, if not more important than the real world, then Web3 and NFTs in particular are the first opportunity we've had to actually put a flag in the ground and say, this is the thing that I own. And I think that although that can be exploited, and you could argue that it's creating scarcity where scarcity isn't needed, and that's another problem with a lot of NFTs and sort of rarity qualities that goes into them, blah, blah, blah. I'm not going to go into it. There are potential pitfalls for that, but at the same time, it's, I think, unavoidable because we need people to be able to put that flag in the ground and say, here's the thing that's valuable to me, and I have invested in it. I own it. It's mine. Just like we would with buying a painting out of a gallery or buying the flat that you live in or anything like that.
Mm-hmm. And the other thing that sort of comes to mind as you're saying that is one of the big advantages with using digitized kind of version of a lot of the stuff that exists in sort of the real world, right? I mean, you have shares of stock, you have contracts that are on paper as opposed to in code or something like that. Is that the startup costs are negligible, and so the amount of experimentation you can do is sort of mind-boggling. And I remember this feeling like very viscerally about probably maybe a year ago or something like that, where my co-founder and I went quite deep into kind of crypto and trying to understand it as far down as we could, and just witnessing in real time the speed with which things are moving is kind of overwhelming. It's almost like we're like felt like we had stumbled into this parallel universe where it's like there's this different financial system that is evolving at 10x.
Yeah.
The speed and property rights and governance and all this kind of stuff in this sort of digital frontier that it's like people don't even realize what's going on. It's like moving at a different like time moves differently in this world. It's just kind of overwhelming.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. Cool. Well, we talked a little bit about video games, sort of the positive, but then also one of the things you brought up was maybe some sort of risky or not healthy relationships that especially young people might develop online in like a multiplayer game, something like that. We have a lot of parents who are in our audience. I'm sure that maybe perked up some ears. I'm curious if you have any thoughts or advice for a parent who might be concerned about what you just described. Maybe they don't know who their kid is playing one of these games with. What do you have any advice for them in terms of how they can play a proactive role in facilitating healthy relationships online? I'm
not an expert in that, but so I don't have any really practical advice. But I think the very obvious thing to say is to not be afraid to communicate constantly with your child or whoever your friend about these. What I was saying earlier on that these things, science doesn't say these things are dangerous to us as they are, like games and on other online activity, but they will be if somebody is engaging in it to escape their real responsibilities. And the only way you'll be able to tell the difference is if you ask the question, and if you make it possible and safe feeling for your kid or your friend or whoever to open up to you about those things. I mean, that is easier said than done. It's not easy to get teenagers to talk about their feelings, but I think that just first of all, accepting, especially if you're in that generation where it seems like a weird thing to want to spend more of your time online than offline, to accept that is a valid need for younger generations, and to not just try to say, well, you're allowed half an hour a fortnight a day and that's it. That's not going to work. Accept what their needs, accept the feelings that they're having about it, acknowledge these things, make it okay to talk about them, and then increase connection and awareness of their patterns as much as you can, by making it okay for them to talk to you about it. I think that's the only way you can really healthily involve yourself in that. Because the temptation, of course, is going to be just to slam down the rules. But kids are there to break the rules.
Yeah, the reactionary impulse to go into the woods is sort of, that option's kind of off the table at this point. Yeah. Awesome. Well, I really enjoyed this conversation. I want to make sure folks who are listening know exactly how to get started with Betwixt. How can they do that?
Well, come to our Twitter page, which is at Betwixt NFT, where you'll find a link to our Discord, or simply come to the Discord. The Discord link will be in the show notes for this podcast.
Show notes. Yep.
What we have in the Discord server, by the way, which I haven't mentioned, is the current cohort of people coming through the game at weekly intervals. So we're calling these people, these are the first settlers in the in-between, if you like. We call them our elders. There will be no other elders, so only the people who buy this round of NFTs will be able to be an elder. And our elders are currently on Dream 3 of 11 at the time of recording. But it doesn't matter if you're late to the party, you catch up. Everybody's going through one dream a week. In between the dreams, we've paced it that way because we want people to have enough time to play, of course, but also because we want people to have enough time to process in between dreams what they are experiencing. Because if you just binge the whole thing, which, by the way, people did when we put the test versions up and didn't have a way of staggering it, not everybody, but some people would just binge the story. And they obviously wouldn't be able to retain as much of the information as if they had taken it at stages and processed in between. So we're staggering it in Discord. And that means that our elders are playing these dreams. And then in the Discord server, they have access to extra resources. We've got a snippet of psychoeducational information for anyone who wants to read it, which explains the particular psychological theories at play and the process at play in the dream that just played. So that's the taking the shiny thing apart bit. If anybody wants to do that, they get to do it. We also have self-hypnosis recordings, which are essentially sort of like guided meditations, but cooler. They're available for anybody who wants to play them. And we also have these sort of group journaling prompts and questions where you get to answer the question for yourself and at the same time see how other people are answering it, and that way people get to compare their experience to other people's experience going through the same game, because invariably they're really different. So yeah, if anybody wants to be involved in that, assuming there are any NFTs left at the point when this podcast goes out, we're about half of them at the moment. Then they need to come to Discord, and in the Discord, be really careful. If you're not an NFT person, only ever use the official links to go and buy NFTs, because it's entirely possible for somebody to rip off and make it look like they're selling a Betwixt NFT when they aren't. So come to our Discord, go to Mint Details, click on the link, and you'll be able to buy with either crypto or a credit card from the Galaxis site an NFT. And then the instructions are basically on the back of the NFT, and you just get yourself involved in the game and you start playing. Ellie and I and our dev and a group of really great people that we're calling guardians in there are around most, if not all of the time, to answer people's questions. So please feel free to reach out if you want to.
Excellent. And your personal Twitter also is at Hazel Gale. So Hazel Gale, Gale. We'll put all the links in the show notes. Zibbs, thanks a ton for coming on.
Thanks for having me.